Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be doing a tier list video, so a little different from what we usually do, but I'm going to be tier listing these guys. We got top 10 talent, we got top 20 talent, we got a first round grade, we got a second round grade, and we got to have a day 2 to 3 overall guys. There's no guys on this list that are going to be undrafted, so we're just going to go through some of these guys. These are all offensive players in the upcoming draft. Some of them I want to talk about a little bit more than others. Some are pretty self-explanatory, but let's just get right into this. And first off, we got quarterback from Alabama, Bryce Young, who I think is the best quarterback in this draft. Not the best player necessarily, but I still think he's probably a top 3 guy overall. But I do think he's the best quarterback in this draft, and he probably will go within that first 2 picks. Just depends on whether we see him go to the Panthers or the Texans, depending on who the Panthers want to take. I think he's a little better than this next guy, CJ Stroud. I think CJ Stroud's also a top 10 talent. I'm a bigger fan of Bryce Young. I know there's concerns with his size and specifically his height and his weight, but I think he'll be fine at the next level. I think he'll still be a stud and be able to perform. And then next we got Anthony Richardson. He's an interesting case. Depending on who you talk to, this might be a very different placement, but I'm going to place him in the top 20. I do really like him as a player overall. I think there's some holes that he has to develop in, and a lot of his concerns, I guess, are just his development and if he will be able to develop. And I think he will, as long as he's in a good system. I think he'll go top 5 overall, if not easily top 10 pick. But I think he's more towards that top 20 talent-ish area if we're just talking about talent-wise, not where I'm projecting them to go, which is the same with Will Levis. I think he's a top 20 guy. I'm not a huge fan of him compared to the rest of the quarterbacks in this draft, but I still think he definitely has some tangibles that will be able to go into the next level at the NFL. He did have issues with his touchdown to interception ratio, but I'm sure he'll be able to figure that out depending on which system he goes in. And the next quarterback that we have, I guess the last of this group, is Stetson Bennett. I think he's a day 2 to 3 guy. I don't think he's an undrafted player. I think he can definitely provide something to an NFL team, especially a team that needs a backup quarterback. I think he would be a great backup quarterback. He's proven to be a winner, and I don't think he's going to be a starter anywhere. Obviously, Stetson Bennett, a great player overall in his college career. He had a great team around him too, and he did exactly what he needed to do and a little bit more. And I think whoever drafts him, I would say he's probably around that 5 to 7 range, depending on what teams want and what teams need, and depending on who's left on the board. But I don't think he should go undrafted at all. And then next up, we got Jackson Smith-Njigba. We got 3 wide receivers on here. Jackson Smith-Njigba is an interesting one because depending on who you ask, he could definitely be your wide receiver 1. I've even seen him be wide receiver 3 or 4. I have him more around that wide receiver 3 area, so that's why I'm giving him a first round grade. I think he's a great receiver, but I think that with his size, he might be restricted to the slot, which isn't a terrible thing. But compared to a guy like Quentin Johnston, who I think is a top 20 talent, I just think Johnston provides a little more for you. I think he was a better receiver in college, bigger guy overall, and especially in a draft with a lot of smaller wide receivers. I think Johnston definitely proves himself as the number 1 guy, but I still think Jackson Smith-Njigba should definitely go in the first round. I see him more as like a 25-ish pick, and same with Jordan Addison. I'm a big Jordan Addison fan, but I think these guys are definitely in the top 3. I think Zay Flowers might crack in there depending on what we see draft wise. I think Jordan Addison will probably be the 3rd receiver drafted. But I do think that there is some issues in his game. There's some holes, but I think he'll be able to figure it out at the NFL level like most of these guys. That's why he's a first round talent. And then we got 3 tight ends here. We're going to start with Dalton Kincaid, who I think is the best tight end in this draft. I'm going to put him in a top 20 talent. I think that compared to him and Darnell Washington and Michael Mayer, I think he's the best overall. He just provides the most, in my opinion. I think Michael Mayer is very close, but I'm giving Kincaid a top 20 overall talent-wise grade. And I think if I'm a team like Tampa Bay at 19, if I'm comparing, I guess, Dalton Kincaid specifically in this point to Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith-Njigba, I feel like I'm getting more out of a guy like Dalton Kincaid rather than those 2 guys. Next up, we got Darnell Washington, and I think he's really on this edge of the first round grade and second round grade for me. I'm a big fan of him, and I know that he obviously has some issues blocking that people have talked about, but he's just so big of a receiver. I guess a tight end overall, but receiving tight end. I would say he's a second round grade, but very close. I think he'll go in the second round, but very high. There's a lot of teams that not necessarily need tight end as their top strength, but if a team misses out on a receiver, Darnell Washington overall could be a very strong piece for your offense. And Michael Mayer, I have him as a first round grade. I think he's a little lower than Dalton Kincaid. I just feel like I get more out of Dalton Kincaid. I think they're very close, but I see Michael Mayer more of that 25-ish area in this draft. I think he's definitely a first round pick, but I wouldn't say he's top 20 talent. Bijan Robinson, though, this is a guy who's a top 10 talent, which we don't really see with running backs. Especially since the Saquon Barkley draft in 2018, teams are very hesitant to take a running back high overall, just because you don't really want to pay the running backs like we've seen with Zeke not getting his contract extension. And teams really want a guy who's on their rookie contract at running back because they want to invest in other positions. And I get that. But Bijan Robinson should be drafted in the top 10. Whether he is, we're not really sure. I doubt it at this point, unless the Eagles really want to take him at 10. But if I was a team and you can get Bijan Robinson anywhere after the 10th pick, it is an absolute steal and probably going to be the steal of the draft. Next, we got Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's a second round guy. I think there's a lot you can get from him overall, but we kind of a weaker running back class. I would say that there's a lot of good guys around that day 2 or 3 area, like Zach Charbonnet, who I'll just put in there right away. I think there's a lot of good guys, especially comparing it to the wide receiver class. I wouldn't say it's as top heavy as the wide receiver class. I think there's a lot of good guys, though, in that day 2 to 3 area that we'll see in the second, third, and fourth round. And then we got our offensive lineman to end this off. We got Darnell Wright first. I would say he's a second round grade. I think he's kind of on the edge. He's a guy like Darnell Washington that I wouldn't be surprised if he gets drafted in the first round. But since there's a lot better tackles, in my opinion, which we'll see with the next 3 guys, I don't really see 4 tackles being first round grades, in my opinion. But I do think that Darnell Wright has really proven himself. He's really jumping up a lot of boards, and he has made probably the biggest jump on my board tackle wise. I have him as the 4th overall tackle, and I think he deserves that. He was more towards the 8 to 10 range when I started making my board in January, but he has risen up a lot. And then talking about the top guy, we got Paris Johnson, who I think is a top 10 talent. I think he'll end up going to the Bears at 9. And if they can get him trading back from 1 to 9, that's still a great pick overall. I think he has proved that he's the best player. He has the combination of the size and the speed and the talent and the strength. And then we got Broderick Jones next. I think he's a first round grade. I wouldn't say necessarily that he's a top 20 guy, but I do think that a player like him who still has a bit of growing to do, and I would say not size-wise, obviously, but I would say skill-wise, he definitely has some areas that he can improve on. And I think as long as he goes to a team in the first round, I still think it's a big win for him. I don't see him as a second-round guy. I think he definitely deserves to be a first-round pick, whether that be at 20 or whether that be anywhere between that through the 31st overall pick. He should definitely go in the first round. And then next, we got Peter Skoronski. I have him as a top 20 talent. Some people have him as their best tackle in the draft, but I guess my concerns lie with the same as a lot of people who have concerns about him. The smaller arms, and just comparing him to Paris Johnson, I'd rather have Paris Johnson. And I think Skoronski kind of is that 15-ish area. If I'm going off a big board, top 20 talent, definitely more towards that 13 to 16 area. Then we got the interior offensive lineman here. We got Steve Valley from TCU. I think overall, an interesting guy. I would say he's a second round grade for me. I think he's the second best interior lineman in this draft behind Osiris Torrance. And this interior lineman draft isn't the greatest, especially when we compare it to tackle, but I do think there's going to be some good guys later. And a guy like John Michael Schmitz, who I'm going to say is a day 2 to 3 guy. I think that he will probably go in the early 3rd round. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go in the 2nd round, but I think there's going to be a lot better talent to go around the board, especially in this draft when we have a very deep defensive class, edge-wise, cornerback-wise, and we have a very deep wide receiver class too, especially past those first-round guys that we have on this board. So overall, if you guys enjoyed this video, I know it's a little different, but if you want to see me do a defensive tier list for this draft, we can go through guys like, I mean, we got a lot of cornerbacks to go through, so I can pretty much add anyone on here that you guys would like to see. There's a lot of guys that I want to talk about, guys like Nolan Smith, even guys like Christian Gonzalez, who are talked about a lot, but I really want to talk about him. I see a lot from him and Joey Porter. I think he's a very interesting player. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this, leave a comment down below on what you want to see next in a tier list, and we'll see you guys in the next video.